We've known about Arch Manning for several years now. Despite the family's best efforts to not have him blow up into just kind of let him have a normal high school recruiting experience, he is apparently that good, and we're not going to ignore that. What makes him our number one overall player?
I think, Andrew and I discussed it yesterday really at length, but he burst onto the scene as a freshman. And on top of that, we kind of talk about the pedigree. And I think a lot of people jump to that conclusion. He's in this spot because of his last name. But you certainly factor that into the equation in terms of the bloodline. Obviously, his two uncles, two Hall of Famers, and Peyton and Eli Manning, and then his grandfather, Archie, as well, who was a very good player in his time. So on top of that, he's 6'4", he's 220 pounds plus. He's exactly what you're looking for in terms of the physical tangibles in the clay as well. Had a really good year as a freshman. He's been really good as a sophomore and junior. He's 25-6 as a starter. He completed 66% of his passes over the last 3 years. But there's certainly a lot to like. I think when he's protected, he's as good as anybody in the country. On top of that, he's maybe a little bit different than his uncles in terms of his mobility and his ability to extend plays with his feet as well. But, with a couple months until the final 2023 rankings, I mean, this is an open race for number one. There's Malachi Nelson, who's committed to Southern California, and Lincoln Riley. And then there's also Nico Iamaleava as well, who's recently committed to Tennessee. So he's going to have a battle on his hands, but he certainly looks up to the task, in my opinion.
Well, I think for me, I mean, Cooper hit it on the head right there. It's the tools. Obviously, the last name carries a ton of weight, and that really does in the world of scouting. I mean, past two NFL drafts, day one, day two, 1 in 8 guys had a relative that played on Sundays or was selected on Sundays. So that's always kind of an indicator. Obviously, the Manning name carries some weight. I mean, for me, you're trying to project where a guy's going to be at. And when you look at Arch, he checks off a lot of the right boxes. You never really know what a quarterback's going to be until those bullets are flying. I think we saw, I don't want to say, I hate using the word adversity, but that game on ESPN, when Isidore Newman took on Tampa Berkeley Prep. And to me, Tampa Berkeley Prep, yes, they have a 5-star edge rusher, a bunch of guys going to Power 5 schools, guys you guys are going to see, making plays on Saturdays, but it's not the most talented group. And I thought Arch kind of struggled. So I still think there's a ton of room for improvement. We're not saying he's a sure thing, future first-round pick, but right now we feel good about him, and we'll see how this plays out over, really the next 8 months. I mean, who knows if he'll be at the Elite 11, but he's going to play a senior season. And like Cooper said, there's some other big quarterbacks that we feel really good about him, or feel really good about right on his heels.
We'll get to some of those other big-time quarterbacks in a second, but because you brought it up with Elite 11, the last quarterback class that I really thought, like, wow, these guys are just very different and deeply different, with a couple guys who were special, was that class with Trevor, Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields in it. You guys saw those dudes in person, or at least, evaluated them when you were working for colleges. What do you think Arch is on that sort of Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields level as a recruit? I mean, not every number one overall player is created the same. I mean, Spencer Rattler was the number one overall quarterback in his given year, but I don't think he would have sniffed the number one overall spot if he had been a year older and had been with Trevor and Justin. So I guess I'm asking, like, relative to some of the best quarterback prospects you've seen through their junior year, because we still haven't seen him play his senior year, where do you put a guy like Arch so far?
I think you'd be a little bit hesitant to put him in that conversation with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, you got to think back to Trevor Lawrence and how established his high school career was coming out of the state of Georgia as well, not only with the passing titles, but I'm not sure if he lost a game in high school. So Justin Fields also a very dynamic athlete. I think Arch, when you evaluate him earlier in his career as a freshman, I think that would have been fair to say that. I think as a sophomore and junior, I don't want to say it's almost like he's more prone to criticism in a sophomore and junior year. There's twice this season they failed to put up more than 7 points. That came against better competition. Andrew mentioned him struggling against Keon Keeley and Berkeley Prep, and then in the playoffs as well. And we talked about this at depth yesterday. I think there's just more questions, but we study Arch Manning more than anybody else in the class. He's the number one player. Obviously, he's got that last name as well. So there's going to be more attention. He's going to be a little bit more under a microscope. I'm really looking forward to his senior season. I want him to put it all together and really kind of get back to that player that we saw as a freshman. And that's not to say that he struggled the last 2 years. That, like Drew said, there's just been a little bit more adversity. So this senior year is really going to be key for him in terms of the evaluation process and seeing where he stacks up.
But I'll say this, I'm not ready to put him in that category because let's go back to Justin Fields. I mean, this time in his development and his recruiting cycle, Justin Fields, I think, was a 3-star. It was really right now. You know, he went to a few Elite 11 regionals. I mean, he was committed to Penn State, backed off that commitment, and then he skyrocketed. They go out to the Elite 11 finals, which when it was still out in Oregon at Nike's campus. And I remember it was like the Beatles. We used to stat games, you know, at 24/7 Sports. We would stat every game, and people were fighting to take stats for that. I think they matched up one time, Justin Fields versus Trevor Lawrence. It was kind of crazy. So I still think there's question marks about it. I don't think any of us are ready to say he's for sure the number one. I don't think I can put him in that category yet, but I do think you bring up a good point. Sometimes you go out to the Elite 11 or you go out to the opening and it's like, hey, this quarterback class really isn't that great. Where would the number one guy this year rank in another year? And I'll say this, though. I do think the crop of passers here in 2023 is pretty good. And I know Cooper's been diving into the 2024 film. I said this yesterday when we were doing another show, just kind of peeking ahead, and it's early. But I would want to be grabbing a quarterback now, maybe as opposed to next cycle, if I'm looking for kind of, I don't know, I hate the term franchise guy, but kind of looking for my arm that I think is going to be QB1 for me.
If college had a draft, you'd be trying to trade up to get one of these top guys. Certainly a lot of teams in the mix still for Arch Manning. He's keeping it wide open. I know our Steve Wiltfong has been all over that story. You know, what, Bama, Texas, I've seen Florida, Georgia mentioned, probably a couple other teams that I just forgot to name. But he's taking all his visits, really seems to be taking his time, and would look to make his decision once he gets all his information.